I brought Brian Whipker back into the conversation so he can comment as well.
Can I,
Um,
can I add something to Joyce's comment about insects? We had a colleague here at NC State, Stephen Frank. He looked at the effects of PGRs on the growth habits and populations of biological control insects. He actually found it, but the rates were on the little on the high side because of that tighter canopy, that it was more difficult for those insects to move around the plant, and so consequently there were less the population increase of those biological insects decreased over time, or did not increase as much over time. So there can be some effects on movement for the biologicals with the PGR application.
okay, just a comment that Brian did search out a rate for an earlier question that Alan Hammer at Purdue University found that 2.5 parts per million of paclobutrazol as a liner soap worked well on easy wave blue petunias. So that's a rate that worked well in Indiana. Brian or Joyce, any good rates on controlling growth on dahlias?
The Hoover asked the question, can you be specific of whether or not you mean tuberous dahlias or dahlias that are rooted rooted cuttings?
Okay.
And while that's coming up, I did look up some of the other potential rates for liner soaks for vigorous greenhouse annuals. So really, when you're looking at paclobutrazol, the rates probably for the north are going to be between 1/2 and 4 part per million. For the south, we're recommending slightly higher, 2 to 8. For uniconazole and fluoropyrimidol, top fluor, those rates are similar and they're lower. That's 0.05 to 0.5. So 0.5 to 0.5 of a part per million for the north, and between 0.1 and 1 for the south. So those are starting rates. You're going to have to play with it because different plants respond differently, but that would give you some other rate possibilities.
Okay, so it came back and the growers wondering about vegetative propagated dahlias. Does that help you at all, Brian?
I'm going to have to look up the rate. Well, I can't reach the rate guide that just came out because I'm tethered to the to the computer. It is on there. I believe we had it in there. Let's see. I can reach it. So okay, give me a second. So
Okay.
we need more of that music coming back. So the
Let,
rate.
let me ask a perennial question here while you do that, Brian. Do you have any data, Joyce, in regards to applying PGRs on young seedlings of perennials, especially at the cotyledon or first leaf stage?
We have not made applications that early. We are typically buying, when we get seeded material, we're typically buying the plugs in a little larger than that. Again, based on what we've done with liners and our rooted cuttings, I would say that you would want to be very careful. You would basically treat them like an annual plug, going with very low rates of some of the soil active materials, or maybe something like the ensemidol, the softer materials. But no, I have no experience. I have no rates to suggest.
Probably if a starting point might be, I know it goes back 8 or 10 years, so I think it's still online. Roger Steyer did some work. A lot of his work at that point, I think, came out in GPN, and they have a pretty good online library. So why don't you go back and look at that, because in the regular vegetative annuals, there are some very low rates that are no, sorry, seed annuals. There's some very low rate recommendations that are out there, and that might give you a baseline of where to start for what you need to do. So Roger Steyer, Styer, look on the GPN website I think you'll probably find some baseline information. So
Okay, a question about foliar sprays with diminizide. Um, Effect of spraying on cloudy days or having no sunlight at all affecting the efficacy um, with the diminizide spraying.
We've seen some improvements in absorption and activity of diminizide based on those conditions. Again, you're increasing the drying time so that the material stays wet on the leaves longer. I think a lot of times when people say they didn't get any effect from a PGR treatment, they applied it under conditions where it was dried off very quickly and was not absorbed by the plant. So the cloudy conditions, no sunlight, very cloudy is a very good time. Some people are even applying their diminizide in the dark, and that has its plant disease issues in terms of leaving the plants wet, but it basically you're looking for high drying time, a long drying time, I should say.
well, I mean, to add to it, and if I heard it correctly, Joyce was talking about the boom, people going with the mist level of water on a boom later on to re-wet the leaves. Uh, that would work. Or, I made that comment about some of that top floor work we did about re-wetting the leaves. So if it dries too much, you can, and you see that it's drying too much, you probably, I think it probably would work. You just go back out, and if you can do a light mist, you're not washing the product out, you're merely re-wetting those leaves, you can then extend that uptake. So you can, especially if it's cloudy, you think you got time, and then boom, it dries down, and you might not have as much activity. So you can counteract that with re-wetting the leaves.
Okay, there was a comment that I just wanted to bring up about, and I think we've all probably dealt with this at one point or another, is getting plants that are overdosed, specifically with a drench. That you want to be careful about not overdosing things, so that they don't quote unquote freeze, as the grower commented, and just really stall those plants out long term, because it will really impact the post harvest quality and the consumer satisfaction with those plants.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, that is too much chemical. Uh, but we did some studies with even some pampas grass, and we nailed some of the upper rates. Now the upper rates, because of the distortion of the roots, did not establish those roots in the soil, but the other ones that were even moderately affected, they did start growing at the end of the season. They were bigger. So I think it's our responsibility as an industry to make sure that there are plants that the end consumer will be happy with. And so we got to get those rates right. And I guess I used to think more so of complete control, of looking at rates. And I'm really kind of backing down on that philosophy of getting moderate control, and then those ultra low doses of PGRs can come back in if need be to give the control if the weather conditions are such that you have to reapply, but you don't lose your you don't overdose and lose that management option if the weather turns against you and you have an overdose then condition. So I've been backing down, and I agree with that grower's comment that it's irresponsible to overdose, but if you get the rate right, you can have the positive effects in the greenhouse. And once those roots get to the side of the pot, or I should say get into the soil, the plant's going to start growing. That's our goal.
All right. Any other PGRs besides Ethithon that affects rooting?
IBA. It is a PGR.
Well, I also mentioned in the branching talk that the BA can also reduce rooting. If you apply it too early before the roots are formed, we found some reductions in the roots, the root mass. We didn't see that. It wasn't a it was a significant reduction in root growth, but it wasn't enough to affect the grow out of the plugs. But that's why we backed off to recommending the application after the plants have formed roots, after you pulled them off mist, because BA can definitely reduce rooting.
Okay, another bulb question. Is it too late to drench for height control once you've brought the plants in to the greenhouse for forcing after they've been cooled?
Well, the body of work that, I mean, Brian Krug did some work down on drenches, and Bill Miller's done a ton of work. You can do that, but the key is it's basically the day after you bring them in. You have to make your application at that point, and that there are rate recommendations in the new PGR guide that's out there, um, and that will give you an idea of what to end up using for the specific bulb. But you have to apply it. The key is many people will bring the bulbs out like almost at dark. They warm up overnight in the greenhouse so that you don't get water scorch, and then by that time the plants you can make that application that day or the next. So you have to make it early. Later on, they start growing. Um, very little. You'll have very little effect for your chemical dollar you invest.
Yeah, I would agree. And just kind of use the analogy of a freight train. Those bulbs are ready to go once you bring them into the greenhouse for forcing, and sometimes the substrate drench is just too much of a delayed effect to stop that freight train. Um, let's see.
So I'll throw in while you're reading the dahlia rates. They're in the PGR guide. There's like 5 or 6 chemicals that are there. They're all label rates. So if you go to the egrow.org website under the research tab, we have the new PGR guide listed there. So if you can download that PDF, all the rates are in there for abide ARES, dimenazide, a combination, Paxsols, chlormequat, and concise. But of course, you look at the wide assortment of cultivars that are out there, you're going to have to make the call whether or not it's vigorous. So you go the higher end of the rate, or it's not as vigorous. And that there's been such an explosion of different cultivars. Hopefully there's some cultural information from the supplier that help you know which end of the spectrum to use for the chemical you select.
Okay, another question about using another product in combo with PGRs, insect growth regulator in combo. Brian and Joyce, would you agree that it's just really going to depend on the product that you're tank mixing it with, and you just need to reference the label?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and standard procedures, you're mixing some activity there that I think you're going to have to go by some suggestions from a specific chemical company if they know that another grower did it and it worked. I don't know that. So until I get some confirmation it works, I'm always reluctant. I don't know of any rates that work or if it's possible.
Okay. What about, is there a best time to apply Psychocell to geraniums to avoid the phytotoxicity of the yellowing of the leaves?
Boy, I don't, Joyce, pipe, or either of you two pipe in when you want to, but I think there's probably a little stress factor, so probably not in the middle of the day because just from heat stress, lowering that rate lower than 1500 or even 1250 would probably be the biggest factor that would affect it. I would think a little more stress would amplify the effects.
I would agree with that.
Temperature, I think, is probably the biggest issue. You want to make sure you're under moderate temperatures. I'd say in the 70s.
Which reinforces earlier in the day to help on uptake too.
Right.
So altogether, good idea.
So what about still sticking with geraniums and but switching over to Florel? A question about any effects on the flowers of geraniums when Florel is used as a drench at the finishing stage.
Yes. Give me a second. I gotta remember what study I was doing. Okay. No, the answer is no. Sorry, I was thinking the spray rate. Off the top of my head, I would say we had a slight delay with those drench rates that you saw on those slides. There's in the new PGR guide from with Grower Talks. There's an article in there that shows it. We really did not have that much of a delay with the drenches, less than to be expected, especially when you got the rates down at the 125 part per million range. We saw more effects. We did an initial study on seed geraniums that we did have more effects of delay on geraniums. And then because you can't sell them till they have flowers, those plants actually in some cases ended up being bigger because we measured them when they bloomed. They bulked up, so you actually saw an inverse effect. Now on petunias, we saw some on seed petunias that a lot of, it varies by cultivar, but some of those rates just nailed them very badly. But then we didn't get quite as much effect going on a more vigorous vegetative petunia. So less effect, go at the lower rate, and we didn't really see that much of a delay from what I recall from the study, only a few days, which is normal with the PGR.
Okay. Joyce, do you have a broad PGR rate for delphinium, knowing that some of the cultivars have different responses? Maybe a nice middle ground to shoot for?
No, I would be afraid to recommend one. I would advise you to go to the PGR guide for the herbaceous perennials, where there are quite a few different studies and recommendations. Let me make a point. The PGR guide for the herbaceous perennials is not just a label guide. I mean, it's not primarily a label guide, because most of the research results that have come out from different labs are not included on the labels, or they're in such a general way that they won't do you any good. So most of what's in here are actually research results. So they give you some ideas of what was effective and what wasn't, what overdosed and what didn't. And it is broken down by source, north, south, or unspecified. But there you can look at the cultivars or the series that were evaluated under some of these studies, and I don't see anything that I would consider a middle ground that would be safe on a wide variety of cultivars, because I've already shown you how variable those cultivars can be. But I would suggest you look at these and see what is close to what you're interested in, which cultivars you're growing or which series you're growing, and go from there. And of course, test it on your own operation.
And Joyce put that PGR guide for perennials also up on the website under that research tab. There's both the annuals and perennials. So if you don't have a copy and you don't want to go searching for it on the web, egrow.org, the research tab has it.
Okay, we are technically out of time. If Joyce and Brian, if we do have one or two more questions that haven't been answered, we can continue to answer these and capture them on the recording. We still have about 86 people on the webinar if you want to answer a few more questions and go over a little bit.
Sure, we're willing.
Yes. It's raining outside in Raleigh. It's a good time to answer questions.
Plus, nothing like putting you on the spot and making you say no when everybody's listening, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So one question is, are there any options for small growers other than buying an expensive $3,000 chemical doser for applying drenches to small pots, like 4.5-inch pots for annuals?
Boy. Bonsai label does allow for chemigation, and probably all the packlows do. Read it though, but you could run it through the drip line, but you're going to have to, the customization gets hard. You're a small grower, you already got small lots, so that makes it difficult. That's where, if you're a small grower, it's consistently a problem. I think you need to go back and look at the liner soaks, because you can liner soak 50, 100 plugs, vegetative annuals, in one go. I I would suggest you pick the middle ground of the rate. You want half control is what you're looking for. So use a lower rate, make your application from the get-go. The plant will be a little slower at the beginning, but it's going to grow out of it, and then you can customize it with a foliar spray later on. And that might be your cheapest option. It certainly, you'll cut your chemical use down probably about 80% also, but you got that labor from pre-plant soaking it. Joyce, you got any addition?
Yes, I think the other option would be to go with a sprinch. And basically, you can use your spray equipment for higher volume applications. Yes, you're going to use more chemical that way, but you'll get that combination of the drench and the spray, and you'll be able to do it when you need the control. If you have a crop that you don't want that liner soak, you don't want that early control, but need it later, I think the sprinch might be the better idea. You can get a good bit of volume out of your sprayer, and a much more economical way than you can in buying the drench equipment.
Yeah. Actually, Joy, that's a great idea. Just to maybe put it a slightly different spin on that, a spray, we're looking at half a gallon per 100 square feet. A full drench, we kind of say it's kind of like a full gallon. So it's 1.5 times. So it's basically 3/4 of a gallon per 100 square feet. So that gives you the amount of volume that we're looking over a unit area to get that activity. So that's an excellent idea. I don't do that many sprinches, so it didn't come to mind. So I'm happy you brought that up, Joyce.
Okay.
One other suggestion that I've seen smaller growers do, if they really feel that they need to do the drench and those other two great options don't work, is find a container, like a small measuring container that holds only the dose that you need, so you don't have to look at a line and measure each one. You know that a full to the brim dose is the exact dose that you want, or you notch the cup or the whatever container you're using so that it will only hold the dose that you want, and then you don't have to spend so much time measuring. Let's see. A question about spraying the inside of the pots before planting with a Paclo product.
It would be a matter of testing it. I mean, you know that the Paclo is going to stick to the container. Whether or not you got a uniform application, a uniform amount, would be the first question. I know there was work done on applying spin out. It was a product that was supposed to kill the roots when they got to the edge of the pot, and it was supposed to enhance transplanting and all that. But so there's a technology out there for coating the pots with a PGR. But in the case of spraying it yourself, you're going to have to worry about what uniformity you have, and then you're not going to get any growth control until the roots get to the edge of the pot, and that may or may not be okay depending on what your crop is. But I would say it's definitely something you would have to do on site and evaluate for yourself and recognize that it's not on the label.
Yeah, the Claudio Pacian up at Ohio State did some work probably around 2002 on that. I think it was picked up in some of the trade magazines. You can go back and look at some of those rates that were there. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. I think there's a small section or a few comments in the Dolan Wilkins book for Culture Principles and Species. The challenge that comes in, commercially applicability is, that each cultivar or each species has variations in needs, and cultivars have variation needs. Now you're going to apply it to a pot, and how you're going to customize it really starts to get a little challenging. We did find with some experiments we did of looking at clinging of the material to the pot, and we can, but we grew up begonias to the roots were at the side of the pot, and we transferred them over into pots that had the PGR on it, and you do definitely still have a residual effect, even just a small amount of clinging that's going on. So it has It will work, but will it work in a commercially viable way is the question. And I guess to me the answer is no, because the work was done 12, 15 years ago, and we don't see it in the marketplace.
Okay, well, Brian and Joyce, that's all the questions that I've seen posted. Folks, if you have questions that haven't been answered or questions that come up, Joyce and Brian are willing to take your emails. Their emails are listed on the handouts, so feel free to contact them directly if you have a question that comes up as you watch these webinars again, or just reviewing your notes. Brian and Joyce, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. I think we all learned a lot today. And definitely want to thank Fine Americas again for their support and sponsorship of this eGrow PGR University webinar.
And we want to thank you, Brian Krug, for being a wonderful moderator, because you're good at the technology and many of us aren't. So you can lead the way of helping us along.
Definitely. We need these younger guys around.
Well, I'm happy to drag you guys along.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for joining us.